sick blue controller. Just seeing this thing blew my mind as a kid. It showed me that video games existed even before I was born. I would just hold that controller and imagine what kind of cool, mysterious games it would let me play. I remember thinking that the Nintendo guys must have been geniuses for shaping the controller like an M so you'd know that it played Mario. This was also around the time I was huffing Sharpie fumes when my mom wasn't looking. Even though the joystick is kind of made of cheap, shitty plastic that wears down really easily, and the layout looks like it was made for three-handed alien people, from the start I always thought the N64 controller was so cool and unique. It was nothing like the controllers I had back at home, and it's still nothing like the controllers I have at home. And honestly, I think that's pretty cool. I can't think of another mainstream controller that forces you to so heavily change how you interact with it between games. Sure, most of the console's library just uses the classic thumb-on joystick and other hand-on-face buttons type beat, but that only makes it all the more special when some games switch it up on you. Even though there isn't a lot out there that takes full advantage of the controller like this, I love games like Mischief Makers that have you using a more traditional D-pad setup, or others that go for this cool twin-stick vibe like Sin and Punishment. Both of these are low-key some of the best games on the system, but when I was 6 years old, I hadn't heard about any of those yet. What I had heard about was that the N64 had this cool Kirby game where you could get a fire sword and turn into a refrigerator. There was supposedly this revolutionary 3D Mario game that didn't look anything like the others I played. And there was supposed to be this Zelda game on it that was the greatest thing ever created. I wanted an N64 so bad. But seeing as how I recently just upgraded from the booster seat to the front seat, I didn't have a job yet, and I couldn't just buy one off of eBay. The whole console was like this door to a mysterious new world that was just barely out of my reach. One I could only catch glimpses of on early 2010s YouTube Let's Plays before I had to give my brother a turn on the iPad. Yeah, I was an iPad kid. I also drank Danimals every day.
Now that's a blast of flavor.
But that was a long time ago. I just turned 20 years old a couple months back, meaning the N64 has been in my life for 14 whole years, which is a pretty long time if you think about it. But even after all these years of getting to experience the console and its library, that childlike feeling of mystery has never left me. I've gotten to finally play all those games I've wanted to since I was a kid, but there's so much under the surface that we still don't know about. So much more that remains shrouded in mystery and just out of our reach. The development of so many of the games that we love are stories lost to time. But if we want to unravel some of these stories, we're gonna have to go back to where it all began.
As we enter the Twilight Zone.
In 1993, Nintendo used to be total assholes and send out these demonstration training programs to stores carrying their merchandise to, you know, make sure that these underpaid wages knew the legacy of the brand they're representing.
During this holiday season, you and your store will be representing the largest manufacturer of video games in the world. You know,
EA Sports.
Imagine you're some sad, overworked employee at Toys R Us who's already got their hands full dealing with annoying customers, children pooping on the floor, memorizing pages of store policy, and then on top of all of that, you get this ominous VHS tape in the mail that demands that you set up all these Mario-themed demonstration stations, read through the Mario binder with all this paper inside, wear these really cool Nintendo vests complete with both buttons, and make sure you tell every customer about the obvious benefits of the Super NES Superset. Obviously, I never worked at a video game store in 1993, but watching all the shit they had to do stressed me out.
you should have a bunch of stuff that came into the store in a big white box that this tape came out of.
If I got sent this package in the mail on a Tuesday morning, it'd probably ruin my day. But as someone who thankfully doesn't have to deal with any of that, this tape is super interesting. It's even got this little history of Nintendo section where he goes full gaming historian on us.
Nintendo Kopai is established to manufacture Hanafuda, or playing cards, cards that are still produced today.
And this awesome montage of people playing on the Super Nintendo with a fog machine and live music. They look like they're having the time of their lives. I wish I could just go through the screen.
2 of 4 different buttons to wear on your vest.
Everyone, you represent a Nintendo, so you'll be like...
I love how they pull out the Mario World sound effects everywhere like, whoa, you better do it so you don't get fired. The best part about this tape is at the very end though, where Ben over here lets us in on a little secret.
Nintendo is going way beyond in creating fun for the future of gameplay. Check this out. Roll tape.
Nintendo, the world's leader in video games, has joined forces with Silicon Graphics, the world's leader in visual computing, to introduce the most exhilarating, breathtakingly realistic 3D video entertainment ever witnessed. Project Reality.
What those Toys R Us employees might not have known is that they were catching what might have been the very first public glimpses of what would become the Nintendo 64. Project Reality was the result of a 1993 deal being struck between California-based 3D software company Silicon Graphics and Nintendo to make the most powerful and most epic gaming machine the world has ever seen. If Nintendo was visiting California, I wonder if that means Shigeru Miyamoto ate it in and out. I wonder if it lived up to the hype for him. This trailer showed off a taste of what they were trying to accomplish with the new hardware. I can't even imagine how mind-blowing it must have been to hear that graphics like these would be on home consoles within the next few years. It probably felt way too good to be true, which it obviously was looking back now, but that still doesn't change how cool this trailer is. Y'all know me, I love this kind of shit. The whole thing is this early CGI goldmine, with cool, sleek, futuristic cities, otherworldly spaceships flying under the Eiffel Tower, these bees, and this ugly-ass dragon.
I want to play a video game that takes me anywhere I want to go, and lets me be anything I want to be.
You got mail.
I found this comment underneath the trailer's YouTube upload from a guy claiming to have been involved with Project Reality. It's obviously from a comment section, so he could be bullshitting, but something in my heart is telling me that he's true and honest. I worked on the publicity end of this project for Silicon Graphics. My kid is even featured in the promo video. It's basically all we had at the time to show what's possible with the underlying graphics architecture that would end up powering Nintendo 64. This was at a time when Sony was preparing to launch the first PlayStation and Sega was coming out with the Saturn. So the video is aimed at developers and retailers to let them know that Nintendo is on the case. It was fascinating to work with Nintendo. They ended up giving us a bunch of merch, including a not yet released Virtual Boy.
Who the dude that made these videos? Because edits are crazy. This is paradise. You get my subscribe, buddy. Real talk, man. I like his edits. His edits crazy.
Immersive 3D
Takes a lot
system
of
that I
time
found so
to do it.
addictive I had to give it back. Imagine helping Nintendo make their next console and all they do in return is give you this red piece of shit. Why don't you just spit in their mouths too?
The big battle, the big war, the big money here is all about games, though, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And last year the big news was 3DO. But this year, it's here at the particular show is things like Silicon Graphics and Nintendo with their 64-bit announcement. It's Sega talking about the Hitachi chip they're going to do with the 64-bit. They all want to take everybody up to the next generation.
Project Reality would eventually be unveiled to small press groups at the 1994 Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago as the Nintendo Ultra 64. Cruisin' USA and Killer Instinct were shown off as the first two games for the console. Both of these reports of really technically impressive arcade games. And there was especially a lot of hype around Killer Instinct at the time, so folks were super excited to get that arcade quality action in the comfort of their own homes, with supposedly no graphical downgrades.
Available for your home in 1995, only on Nintendo Ultra 64.
But this was another one of Miyamoto's grand lies. Ironically, the Ultra 64 wasn't ready in time for 1995, so Killer Instinct was instead downgraded to the Super Nintendo with this evil-ass Black Air Force game pack. Another really cool thing about the 1994 Summer CES was this huge Donkey Kong Country Jungle exhibit Nintendo set up to advertise its release that year. You can like see the treehouse in real life. And they even played these little nature sounds to really immerse the guests into that game's world. That's really the coolest part about DKC, so I'm glad they brought it to life here. It really nails that dense, humid jungle atmosphere better than any other game could have at the time. Just looking at the game makes me feel kinda sweaty, which is really awesome. With how the music incorporates wildlife noises and wilderness ambience with these really fun, catchy melodies. And how the pre-rendered graphics have this strange blend of artificial 3D cartoon plastic and somewhat impressive realism that gives the game this really interesting texture. I would always look into those cool parallax backgrounds and wonder what's going on just out of sight. So I'm sure I would have enjoyed this exhibit way more than those depressed looking businessmen. Those vultures were probably thrown in the trash.
Yeah, for real.
The public wouldn't get to see what the Ultra 64 even looked like until it started showing up in game magazines like Nintendo Power. To my knowledge, the June 1995 issue of Nintendo Power was the first time the console itself was ever unveiled to the public. They had this awesome double-page spread of it, but interestingly enough, they didn't show off the controller. Maybe they were too embarrassed to whip it out yet. The controller was gonna match the console's earlier gray color scheme and had this way bigger, more premium looking joystick. I wonder if this was the stick they went with. Nintendo wouldn't have been sued for burn injuries because of that stupid ass Mario Party minigame. I get what they were going for with this old design, but the final version is just an improvement all around, with its gray base and colorful buttons. Just looks way more fun. And in a move that shocked a lot of people, they revealed that they would be sticking to cartridges for this next console, as opposed to the CD-ROMs that the rest of the industry was going with. Cartridges offered little to no load times, but also meant they couldn't store nearly as much space as a CD-ROM, nor include any high-quality audio samples or full-motion video.
Let me out of here.
Take it easy.
To top it all off, cartridges were expensive as hell to produce, offering even less incentive for devs to jump on. This pissed off a ton of game studios and caused them to jump ship to the PlayStation. Squaresoft was originally going to make Final Fantasy VII for the Ultra 64, before finding out just how much they'd have to scale back their ideas on it. If they released that shit on the 64, it would have taken up like 20 cartridges. Nintendo claimed they were doing this because of how much faster cartridges are.
Read my lips. CD-ROM is slow.
But I really think they did this because they were bitches and wanted to make it harder for people to pirate their games. You can buy blank CDs at Walmart and burn PS1 games yourself, but if you want these, you're gonna have to mow Miyamoto's lawn. The console probably would have done a lot better than it ended up doing if Nintendo would have just caved in and used regular CDs. But that's easy for me to say here, typing this script 30 years later. This caused them a lot of trouble down the line that they probably couldn't have even anticipated. And this is a sort of Michael Cera tier. But the console switching its name from the Ultra 64 to the Nintendo 64 is actually attributed to Mother Series creator Shigesato Itoi. He thought that the name Nintendo 64 was way more striking and really played to the fact.
Because if any of y'all know, shoot, the Dreamcast had basically made Sega go out of style, or not even just go out of style, just basically go out of commission because they basically
fact that most people at that time just called video game consoles a Nintendo. While I think Ultra 64 sounds cool as hell, I gotta agree with him that simply calling it the Nintendo 64 gave the system this cool mystique.
your boy tired as hell.
Fans would finally lay their eyes on this new rebrand in December 1995, with a Nintendo Power promotional tape called The Invasion of Nintendo. I've talked about these in another video of mine that you can check out, but basically Nintendo Power would send out these VHS tapes to their subscribers to drum up hype for big new releases and keep everyone up to date on the news. I've always really loved these ever since I was a kid, and never waste an opportunity to bring them up in a video. It's kinda like in school how you'd get excited to watch Bill Nye the Science Guy, but instead of talking about stupid shit like matter and light optics, you get to learn about really cool shit like Diddy Kong Racing and Jet Force Gemini.
Well, Trent, my gosh, it's much higher than I thought. We're looking at over 20 different courses here with all types of terrain.
This particular tape had these goons breaking into Nintendo's headquarters in Redmond, Washington, sucking employees' toes until they would cry uncle and give out information and tips about Nintendo's upcoming games for the holiday season.
Gentlemen? Mom?
There's a segment about Yoshi's Island, Killer Instinct, and DKC 2. There were also, like, these weird-ass old ladies who play JRPGs in there, too.
Well, you know Square developed it. Oh, they're the best. They did Final Fantasy, so you know Mario RPG isn't going to suck.
And then this part where their boss talks about ripping off their cocks.
I will be forced to remove a vital appendage.
The tape culminates in a final chapter where the goons fly to Japan and are sent out on a final heist to retrieve a classified N64 videotape from Nintendo's Shoshinkai show. Shoshinkai, also known as Space World, was basically like Nintendo's own trade show, similar to E3 or CES, and were mostly held in Kyoto from 1989 to 2001. This tape offers tons of really cool footage of 1995 Shoshinkai. It's an event that would live on in infamy for the insane amount of interesting prototypes and betas it showed off. After asking around for a little while, the guys stumble into a back room and see it just sitting there ominously, like it's some malevolent high-tech device that will bring an end to mankind as we know it.
It's showtime! Alright, we got the tape. Let's get out of here. You got the keys?
You have the keys.
The tape they find is just this slideshow of screenshots from upcoming N64 games. We got Super Mario 64, Pilot Wings, a new Mario Kart, this mysterious Kirby snowboarding game, our first glimpse at Star Fox 64, and Zelda in 3D. If I saw this at the time, I probably would have shit my pants and called the whole family down to see it. The video games, not my shit pants. From what I can tell, these screenshots were taken from various trailers shown off at that year's Shoshinkai, with the raw, uncut, full clips being shown off to attendees of the event itself. Some of these clips, like the Zelda one for instance, are just tech demos meant to get the audience excited to buy into the console. But some of the games shown had actual beta builds playable at the event, one of these being the 50% complete 1995 build of Super Mario 64. Mario 64 is like the Egyptian pyramids but for video games. They both got this air of mystique and eeriness about them that people can't seem to wrap their heads around. Nobody really knows how the hell they even exist and suspects some supernatural powers might have been involved, but that doesn't stop everyone from thinking they're cool regardless. Mario 64 even has a pyramid in it. It's just such a mysterious ass game, where hardware limitations and general inexperience with the third dimension has crafted such a strange, uncanny, and unique atmosphere that I love to come back to from time to time. I love the later 3D Mario games like Sunshine and Odyssey, but those games don't have the same dreamlike feel that Mario 64 does. While the different areas in those games are clearly meant to take place in a more cohesive world, so many levels in 64 are put together with paper clips and Gorilla Glue, with random geometry that the devs textured with random images they had on sample discs. Other levels take place in these ethereal, floating worlds that have little to no explanation as to where they are or how they even exist. There's just so many strange, minute details that the developers probably didn't even think twice about, but nonetheless has spawned almost 30 actual years of discussion after the fact. Like, what's up with that empty, evacuated little town you can find in Wet Dry World? Who lived there and why is it evacuated? Are they dead? And why did they use this photo of a flooded Yemen as the skybox in there? Out of all the things they could have made the skybox, Miyamoto actually went into the office that day and told the devs to take a picture of Yemen into Photoshop and submerge it underwater for their Italian plumber jumping game. Why does he have to be weird? And Peach's castle is just so weirdly empty. There's some survival instinct in our brains that makes us feel really uneasy when we're walking around big areas that are meant to have people in them, but for some reason just don't. The walls are still covered in these bright colors and happy smiley faces though, giving the whole game this vibe like you just pulled up to the play place but you shouldn't be there. And then you gotta remember that Mario himself probably isn't hearing the castle's happy background music like we are playing the game. He's probably walking around like this. If I was Mario, I'd just tell Peach to go save herself. My ass is not going down there. And don't even get me started on all that Luigi shit. People wanted him to be in the game so badly they'd make up all these ridiculous rituals you had to do to play as him. And the worst part is, I'd believe them.
Once you looked up to statue, do triple jump. This can be tricky and hard to do sometimes.
It'd be stupid shit like you'd have to get all 120 stars, collect 4,000 coins at exactly 3:05 AM on April the 14th during pollen season, so you can get all lucky 7s and revive Aeris on disc 3 after plugging your controller into slot 2, then do 14 proper jumping jacks, and then once you hear a chime while standing at the fountain you'd have to press every button on the controller while simultaneously doing a jungle juice butt chug. Like seriously, does this plaque actually say Ella's Real 2401? Does it say Eternal Star? Does it even say anything at all? You can find the same texture in Dodongo's Cavern, but nobody gave a shit about it there. And that's because Mario 64 just has this really specific weird energy about it that I feel is impossible to replicate in a video game ever again. It was a product of the exact people who worked on it at the exact time they did on that exact hardware. And I know I'm not the only one who feels this way either. I'm sure you've heard this exact spiel from countless other neckbeards before. the past few years, the game has kind of ushered in this internet renaissance. Folks have breathed new life into discussion around this game with insane crackpot conspiracy theories, viral iceberg charts, just really epic Mario-themed ARGs, and this idea that every copy of Mario 64 is personalized. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this already, but the idea goes that there's this experimental AI found within the game that tailors your specific copy of it to you. This could range from some minor details like 1-up locations and textures being changed, all the way to making a ghastly floating head of Wario appear in the game and cause you to go to the hospital. Kinda like that episode of Pokemon that sent all those kids to the ER.
You want fun? Wario show you fun.
This is all just silly creepypasta nonsense, of course, none of it's actually real. But it's still a pretty fun little idea nonetheless, that makes my replays of Mario 64 just a little bit more interesting. Above all else though, this internet renaissance has a really intense fascination with the earlier, more mysterious builds of the game, with footage from the 1995 Shoshinkai demo being extremely infamous and sought after as the years go on. Thankfully, a ton of personal recordings of the event have surfaced over time, along with all these other crusty gameplay trailers that give us a better idea of what Mario 64's prototypes were like. When looking at this footage, you start to notice so many of these weird little differences that make your mind race, like the veil of reality is peeling back and you're looking into some strange alternate world where things are just slightly off. Mario 64 was the first fully 3D game Nintendo ever worked on, so tons of changes and growing pains were inevitable. The health bar changed like 3 times. The UI and font went through so many different revisions before finally landing on the one we know now. And the whole game seems to be using these darker shaders on the polygons that give the game this more sinister energy, even more than it already had. These were images that fans discovered on a 1995 patent for the N64, where we see these ominous screenshots of an early build of Peach's castle. Something about these freaked me out, like I just snuck into the depths of Nintendo and uncovered something I was never meant to see. It doesn't help that the old castle opted for this strange black hole symbol instead of the stained glass that we got in the final game. The textures and lighting weren't the only things that evolved throughout development. Some of the sound effects are just slightly off too in the beta. Like these coins, for instance, just sound a little different. It makes you wonder at what point the devs just decided the sound effect wasn't quite right for their vision and decided to change it to something else. Some sounds were majorly changed though. Like prototype Mario sounds like a heroin addict. Before they locked in Charles Martinet for the game, they settled for the Warner Bros. Sound library. I heard somewhere that a lot of these voice clips came from Mel Blanc, the voice actor of Bugs Bunny. I don't think this was ever meant to be permanent, but it gives earlier builds of this game an even more uncanny feel. I remember tuning into the channel Beta 64 when I was a shitty 10-year-old and seeing that episode he did on Mario 64. You know, Beta 64 sounds like a Nintendo game where you get cucked the whole time, but I watched that video just so completely enthralled with how many assets were removed or changed. I always wanted to run around in that old nighttime, dark-themed version of the castle's lobby and see what its deal was. Peach's castle was already such a mysterious place to me as a kid, and my imagination went wild thinking about how different it might have been before the game came out. For the life of me, I can't find where this footage came from, but this cute little European in the corner of the screen says that the game might have had up to 150 stages.
The size of the game may be up to 150 stages.
I wonder how disappointed he was when the game came out and only had 15. Whether this is just a mistake on his part, or if he somehow got that impression from playing that earlier build, I feel like it only goes to show just how ambitious this game is. It makes me wonder exactly how many worlds ended up being cut from the game over its development. Maybe during the planning stages there were going to be 150 of them before that number had to be scaled down to only the best ones. I know a lot of this is just speculation at the end of the day, but I just love stuff like this. I'm like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. It's that mystery that gets me out of bed in the morning.
Hey, you clicked the right button. We're going to tell you how you could have a chance to win a Nintendo 64 game system and Super Mario 64 game pack of your own. You can check inside these specially marked boxes of Kellogg's cereal.
The N64 is truly breakthrough technology. Nintendo took the power of a $100,000 computer workstation and put it into an affordable home game machine.
Even though Nintendo Shoshinkai 1995 will probably just live on as the place where they revealed Mario 64 for the first time. It wasn't the only playable demo they had that year. Right next to Mario, they also showed off a strange little game called Kirby Bowl 64. Kirby Bowl 64 is one of those interesting canceled games that makes you depressed. Barely anyone knows anything about the game's development, but it's safe to assume it probably would have kicked ass, because it was going to be a sequel to Kirby Bowl on the SNES, also known as Kirby's Dream Course internationally. If you've never played it before, you can actually download a ROM of it and play it on your computer right now by going to some really cool websites. The thing is, Kirby doesn't have legs in this one, so you get to knock him around into enemies and play this really fun pseudo 3D mini-golf that I always like coming back to. The goal is to clear out all the enemies and make it into the hole with as little moves as you can, with classic copy abilities spicing things up and making it more than just a standard mini-golf sim. When I explain it like that, it might make it sound like the video game equivalent of a horse tranquilizer and 14 Tylenols. But once you get the hang of things, it's a really good time, especially if you can get someone to play it with you. Kirby's Dream Course is one of the best competitive two-player experiences you can find on the Super Nintendo hands down. The amount of absolutely diabolical shit you can do to your friend in this game is disgusting. There's nothing quite like lining up a shot just right, launching Kirby off with those crunchy ass sound effects, stealing all your friend's stars, and getting right in the hole. And hey, if you bought the Switch's Soylent subscription, you can even play this game online with rollback netcode. So a sequel to this game on the N64 sounds like a slam dunk. It doesn't have to fake 3D with an isometric view like it did on the Super Nintendo. It can literally just be 3D with no strings attached. No more of that Sonic 3D Blast bullshit. I imagine they could have done some really cool stuff with the gameplay and camera movements on the new hardware too. They were even gonna give Kirby a snowboard, which would have been dope as hell. It was gonna be the first game to implement this new memory card functionality that would let you store data and personal customization from your copy of the game, and bring it to your friend's house using a slot in your controller.
This is a new kind of memory card, and it plugs in there. The card can store customized game or controller settings, and you'll be able to save information on an individual's style of gameplay. So in theory, you'll be able to play against your friends even when they're not there.
I think from the get-go, Nintendo was being pretty smart about this, and knew that they needed to capitalize on that really fun, competitive aspect found in the original game. If everything would have gone as planned with the project, it would have been the first 4-player game on the console, which would have immediately justified the jump to 4 controller ports on it. But somewhere along the way, the devs at HAL Labs got a little big for their britches and decided mini-golf was for losers, thinking it would be way cooler to flesh out that snowboarding mechanic into its own game. So they had to scrap most of what they had and start with a fresh new build. You can't really blame them for changing course like that though. This was during a time where everyone really liked Bart Simpson, and people were going really crazy for extreme sports games like 1080 snowboarding and Wave Race and Tony Hawk during this console generation. I can only assume they told mini-golf fans to eat shit and go get some Warp Star Pop Shove-Its instead.
Oh my god, he on X Games mode.
If this old-ass HTML Japanese Kirby fan site is anything to believe, this rebuild had a pretty sizable staff and was spearheaded by the late Satoru Iwata himself, so you know they were in good hands. It wouldn't be until E3 1996 that this new build would be unveiled as Kirby's Air Ride. They would only show off this measly 7-second clip of Kirby riding down a hill, with a brief glimpse of some 1v1 split-screen action, but it was just enough for everyone to get hyped for some 1080 Kirby snowboarding. According to this Hyperplay magazine, it boasted randomly generated courses that would have increased the game's longevity exponentially. Japanese game company Atlus would go on to implement something similar with Tartarus from Persona 3. I wonder if Virgins would have complained about it here too. Multiplayer was still going to be a major focus like it was in Kirby Bowl, as the game was advertised with some screenshots showing that you could play as not only Kirby, but King Dedede, Poppy Bros, and that iconic ice boss that flashes his ass cheeks at you. Outside of E3 1996, this build would show up in a handful of gaming mags, like in this issue of the UK-based Nintendo magazine system, where it said that the game was around 20% complete and would be slated for a late 1996 release. Considering that the devs probably threw this together in a couple of months with just some paper clips and a dream, it's pretty impressive. But I guess they didn't seem to think so, because this version of the game would be scrapped yet again and get another build about a year later. This time giving Kirby this cool backwards cap, like he just told his English teacher to go fuck herself. I'm calling this one the hat build, and it's by far the coolest version of the game we ever saw. You could fly through rings, do flips, collect these little stars, look at a health bar, and even get off your warp star for some off-roading. It finally seemed like the project was coming together. When I was around 10 years old, I had this vivid dream that I still remember to this day, where I excavated the Kirby's Air Ride beta build out of the dirt in my backyard and finally got to play it. I was flying through those rings and doing cool backflips and shit, just like I always wanted. I remember waking up and being so unreasonably disappointed that none of it was real, that I'm writing about it in a YouTube script an actual decade later. But you can't blame me, it looked like a really cool ass game. With a new release date of late 1997, it didn't look like much could go wrong. So, with all that being said, you'd think these guys would have had a pretty good handle on things after scrapping the game that many times. But you might be surprised to find out the progress on it was going so slowly that it was quietly cancelled in September of 97. The concept would only end up seeing the light of day on the GameCube as Kirby Air Ride in 2003, Air Ride now being one word and not two, very important distinction. Kirby series creator Masahiro Sakurai was feeling cute one day and actually decided to talk about what it was like directing the GameCube release on his YouTube channel, stating that while his version took some ideas from the N64 prototype, they're actually completely unrelated projects that just so happen to share a similar title and concept. The Air Ride that we got was more of a pick up and play kart racer, while according to Sakurai, the N64 version was way more similar to a traditional snowboarding game, more focused on cool tricks and technical button inputs. Even though it still makes me sad that I'll probably never get to try out what could have been, Kirby Air Ride on the GameCube was one of my favorite games growing up. I wouldn't trade all the memories I have of running around City Trial destroying garbage houses for the world. I liked the game so much as a kid, I even cut out a star from a piece of cardboard and would slide down hills to feel like I was really flying on a warp star. So needless to say, this kind of stuff is pretty close to my soul. Even now, I still think about those early builds that 10-year-old me never got to get his greasy little hands on. The staff working on the N64 build would unfortunately be disbanded after the game's cancellation, with some of the team splitting off to work on the first Super Smash Bros, and the others going to work on Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards, which honestly also had a really interesting development in and of itself. Originally, Kirby wasn't going to be the only playable character like he is in the final version. You were going to be able to play as all 4 of the main characters at any time before the idea was scrapped halfway through development, which makes me really sad. Like, the game makes such a big deal about you getting all these friends at the beginning, only for them to randomly show up in stages and give you a cheeseburger. Just like real friends. I still love the game to death, but after hearing about how much more ambitious it was gonna be, it kinda makes the final version seem a little incomplete. This downgrade could have been chalked up to time constraints, as the game was already cutting it a little close to the GameCube's launch. But I feel a big contributor to all this cut content is probably the fact that it started out development on the Nintendo 64 disk drive. If you know anything about the disk drive, you probably already understand that starting development on this thing was actually like taking a bath with a toaster.
Dude, holy shit!
But if you're one of those people who doesn't fall asleep to those 5-hour Did You Know gaming compilations, you might not know what an N64 DD even is. This thing's gonna be crucial moving forward, so I want to cover it so we can be as comprehensive as possible. Also, my dad watches my videos, and I want to make sure that he doesn't get too lost. While the N64 was being developed, I think Nintendo knew they were going to be totally gooped for sticking with cartridges while literally everyone else was moving on to CD-ROMs. But instead of just adjusting the console's hardware and ditching the cartridges altogether, they decided they would pull a Sega and sell a separate disc drive add-on further down the line. They would finally be able to produce CD games and level the playing field with its competitors, utilizing the far superior storage space to win back all of their lost developers, and return Cloud to his rightful place as the— yeah, I'm bullshitting right now, it actually just used floppy disks. I don't know why you assume they would just be normal for a change. You'd never want to smoke with Nintendo. They'd probably bite your dog and puke on the floor afterwards. From what I can gather, it was really the reduced cost of production that made the Big N want to go with the floppy disk format. Even though the DD wouldn't necessarily allow for bigger games, it would make your console twice as tall and allow for enhanced graphics and processing power for the games released on it, similar to what the expansion pack would do. It even had internet connectivity if you plugged in this modem cartridge they sold with it. This modem utilized a subscription service called RANnet that would allow you to send emails, chat, and play with fellow Nintendo fanatics from across the world. This was during a time where online multiplayer and web surfing were practically unheard of on a home console, so the specs were really ahead of its time. Not only that, it was going to have an NES emulator, the ability to download demos for upcoming games, and even a built-in music player. They were even developing an early form of DLC with these disc-based expansions to already released cartridge games. Like in the case with this F-Zero expansion kit, that when used in conjunction with the F-Zero X cartridge, gave the original game 12 new tracks and even a course editor. And you can't forget the small detail that Nintendo planned like all of their major blockbuster releases on this thing to justify its existence, which meant that so many different projects were banking on it to come out and sell as many units as it could. But when you have that many Japanese businessmen relying on you, it's inevitable that the pressure's gonna get to your head at some point and you're just gonna eat shit. And the DD was no different. Even though it was announced as far back as Shoshinkai in 1995, the DD just kept facing delay after delay until it finally saw release 4 years later in December 1999 in Japan only. But in a move I can only describe as... For most of its life, you could only buy this thing through mail order. You had to send around $20 a month for a whole year just to pay it off, like a mortgage. This monthly fee did come with a subscription to RandNet, but it still meant that buying one meant going through hoops you wouldn't have had to otherwise. As you can probably imagine, the N64 DD bombed hard on release, only selling about 15,000 units. After this, Nintendo just kind of pretended like it never existed and canceled all plans to release it internationally. But I don't want to be one of those gamer guys that says that it was a piece of shit just because it sold badly though. I hear so many bandwagoning chuds talk about how terrible the Wii U is for being a commercial failure, while ignoring just how many of its games were actually really solid, and would go on to be some of the most respected and well-reviewed releases for the Switch. So many people treat the N64 DD like it was another Virtual Boy, and while it had some pretty ass-backwards decisions, you can't deny how cool and ambitious so many of its ideas are. I actually really wish I had one, but I also need to start being more realistic about life so I don't set myself up for disappointment. The N64 DD is one of those really unfortunate cases where if it had just come out a few years earlier and not by mail order, it might have been well respected today for its technical innovations like the Dreamcast is now. Even Miyamoto lamented in an interview that the DD probably should have just been included with the N64 when it first launched. By the time it actually came out, the Dreamcast had already released and stole its thunder. The GameCube was already on its way too, so Nintendo fans were like, wow, that's crazy. I'm just gonna like save my money. The add-on would only end up releasing 10 games with it, but the crazy part is that more than 60 AAA titles were planned for it, almost all of which either had to be rebuilt for the N64 cartridge format, ported to another console entirely, or just cancelled outright. Just some of these planned games include Resident Evil 0, Snatcher, Yoshi's Story, an enhanced port of Super Mario 64 along with a straight up sequel to it, Street Fighter 3, Seaman, Dragon Quest 7, Diablo 1, and just a ton more stuff I want to save for the rest of the video. I would also be remiss to mention what was gonna be the add-on's killer app, a project that would eventually become the highest rated game on Metacritic. It sort of became popular in the mid to late 2010s to drop these really fire hot takes on Ocarina of Time. For a while, saying you didn't like the game was red-pilled as shit, like having a Punisher sticker on your SUV. All dudes would fly to your house and sing at you about it. It was crazy. Not liking Ocarina proved you were really sticking it to the man, showing how counterculture you were in a sea of brainwashed Nintendrones.
So the first thing you'll notice when you start the game, everything is so low resolution.
Saying the game actually sucks isn't really a hot take anymore. It's become the de facto Zoomer opinion on this game to say that it's a slow, clunky piece of dog shit that only old heads see any value in, paving the way for real, refined video games like Breath of the Wild. Even though I don't really see it like that, I can almost understand how discussion of this game has gotten to this point. Ocarina of Time had built up such an unreasonable amount of hype since its release, with so many people claiming that it was the peak of video games and the return of Jesus Christ himself. Just scrolling through some of the reviews put out during its release really goes to show just how impactful of an experience it was in 1998. Maybe nowadays it might seem a little primitive and archaic as other adventure games had expanded and refined its formula since then, but what time will never take away is what's actually there. And what's actually there is a landmark release in video game history that still has so many cool moments that in my experience can still spark that same kind of excitement today that they did for folks playing this game over 25 years ago. There's so much talk about what it means for games to age badly, but what a lot of it boils down to is people being overly dismissive of experiences they perceive as old. The way I see it, if something was legitimately good at one point, a little time and technical advancement shouldn't diminish the good that's already there. Even tweaking your mindset just a little bit for some of these older games can open up worlds to you that can leave you just as impressed as the people who played it upon release. But keep in mind, this is still coming from somebody who doesn't mind when a game tests the limits of my patience, or makes me adapt to things out of my comfort zone. This is also coming from a guy who played the hell out of Ocarina of Time and basically all the Zelda games during some very formative years of my life. So if you actually played the game and just couldn't get into it, I don't blame you at all. Even though I probably do have some nostalgic bias, I would never want to claim that it's a flawless masterpiece like all those other older reviews do. I'd say other games during that generation had better combat, better story, and exploration. Even other Zelda games released before this one have better dungeon crawling in my opinion. But I still feel like Ocarina of Time has the best sense of adventure out of any game in that generation. It's just a magical experience, and I'm probably never gonna forget the first time I got out of Kokiri Forest and stepped foot into Hyrule Field to start my adventure. That shit still makes me feel excited, polygons and all. I really get the sense that it's this full, complete package, that it came out the exact way that the devs wanted it to be. But it wasn't easy getting there at all. The game had like 4 different unique builds and the largest development staff that Nintendo had ever had on a game up to that point, with nearly 200 people contributing to the project in some way. Its team of 5 whole directors had to pull so many different, conflicting directions together to create the experience we all know today. Much like basically everything we've talked about so far, Ocarina of Time can be first traced back all the way to a tech demo shown off at Shoshinkai 1995, back when the game was only known as Zelda 64. We see a Zelda 1 inspired 3D Link fighting a dude with that cool metal Mario effect slapped on. You can tell they really thought this reflective metal shit was awesome, with how often it came up in early N64 stuff. And I don't blame them. Imagine working with 2D sprites for all this time, and then you get to play around with effects like these. When you get down to it, it's actually just this flower texture that came with their Silicon Graphics workstations. They probably saw it and felt like they had so much power now. Like when I downloaded the McDonald's app and got the $4 breakfast combo meal for the first time. What's really interesting about this tech demo is that it was actually just made by one guy named Giles Goddard. He was one of the only foreigners working in Nintendo's offices at the time, just because they couldn't find anyone else who was insane at programming as he was. Before he went off to make his own studio in 2003, he would make a name for himself at Nintendo by programming the 3D Mario Head and co-developing the first Star Fox when he was only around 20 years old. I'm 20 years old and all I've done is change my major like 3 times. The big guys at Nintendo commissioned him to put this little video together for Shoshinkai.
But it was also a way of sort of showing that we had something for Zelda. Zelda was there doing something rather than just an announcement. They wanted to actually show something, because I think at that point there was really nothing much to show.
But Goddard is a real champ and didn't stop there. He would take it a step further behind the scenes and experiment with this really interesting portal mechanic that he thought would be really cool for the game. The team that had actually begun production on Zelda 64 weren't at a place where they could properly implement it though. But on the bright side, this hallway and its textures would actually survive to the final release of the game and become the Forest Temple. The game's development would really kick into high gear for the N64 DD after the completion of Mario 64, with the staff really struggling with how to approach the project. They knew just trying to do A Link to the Past in 3D would be extremely difficult, based on how detailed its overworld was. So fresh off of Mario 64, Miyamoto suggested that the whole game take place in just Ganon's castle instead of a sprawling open world, with Link going through paintings to access different areas just like Mario did. While this wouldn't be the worst idea that's ever come out of his brain, making the game like this probably would have made the whole thing feel weirdly segmented and artificial. And the rest of the team probably thought so too. But that wasn't the only loony ass shit Miyamoto was suggesting. The directors of the game said in an Iwata Asks interview, he also thought it would be cool if the exploration was in first person, switching to a Zelda 2 style view during combat encounters. But Yoshiaki Koizumi just wasn't having it. He was in the middle of creating Link's character model when Miyamoto suggested that to him, and he obviously didn't want all that hard work to go to waste, so he didn't even try out this idea even once. If I were in his shoes, I'd probably do the same too. I'd probably be pissed actually, even though they were starting to craft a more solid framework for the game with the third-person perspective locked in and a larger, grander scope. The team really struggled to make open environments that felt interesting, and implement sword fighting mechanics that were actually engaging and made you feel like your dick was huge. The staff would famously take influence from the live Chambara samurai battles to create the incredibly influential Z targeting system, inspired by how the samurai's opponents would approach one by one and circle around the area. They even gave the system a little more charm and polish by creating Link's fairy Navi, who would physically go to whatever you were targeting. She even used to glow red in earlier versions of the game if you locked onto an enemy to show how pissed off she was. Camera lock-on is one of those things that's hard to imagine 3D games without. But before Zelda, this shit wasn't commonplace. Just look at Lara Croft. She's just jumping all over the place, just spraying and praying. Even if the final game's combat can be a little too stop and start for my taste, the fact it runs so fluid and feels as good as it does is just so impressive. Footage from this 1996, early 1997 era of the project is super fascinating to me. So many of the enemies and assets look so goofy and lighthearted, and there's just this really off-putting, empty feeling to all these environments that they still hadn't worked out quite yet. It's so crazy to think about how some salaryman went to work every day in like 1996 and modeled all these cool environments, fully believing he was contributing to the final project and really earning his paycheck. Yet now all his hard work can only be seen in these quick, 3-second 240p glimpses across internet uploads. This one of Link finding the Triforce sparked so many rumors in the years to come, with so many liars claiming that Link could actually still do this in the final game if you played the Song of Storms next to this random triangle in the Haunted Wasteland. Gamers in the 90s would believe anything. You could tell them to jump off a cliff so they could earn the golden Costco membership and they'd actually do it. The game seemed to change so rapidly during 1997, as footage from it at June's E3 looks like a totally different game from the build we would see a couple months later at that year's Shoshinkai show in November. This is where it really looks like Zelda 64 was starting to become the Ocarina of Time that we know today, but still wrestling with some minor changes like a slightly different looking UI, and brighter, more neon puke green on Link's clothes. By this point, the staff had already decided to ditch the N64 DD for this game and just put it on a cartridge. They said in interviews that the DD apparently just wasn't fast enough to read all the little animations they'd programmed in for Link. It was a really tough decision for them and probably resulted in a lot of aspects of the game having to be reworked or removed. But they still didn't want to let the dream go, so they planned an expansion for the game called Ura Zelda to be released afterwards at some point on the DD. There's a lot of debate on what Ura Zelda even was, but the common consensus is that it was going to add online support where you could download new dungeons, and even access a post-game where Miyamoto would come out of the screen and pat you on the back for saving the world. While Ura Zelda didn't end up seeing the light of day, elements of it would show up in the GameCube release of Ocarina of Time with the Master Quest mode, so it wasn't all for nothing. It still kind of makes me wonder what Ura Zelda could have been like if it actually came out, because we know it was going to be way more than just remixed dungeons. But at the same time, it's a miracle that Ocarina of Time even came out at all, considering just how tough development seemed for it. There were so many changes being made up right until the finish line. One of the last times beta content would be shown off before its release was in this Brazilian blockbuster promotional VHS that was only preserved and uploaded by Hard4 Games just a few years ago.
Soa muito tempo atrás, em mundo não muito distante.
I can't find any information on when this was created, but judging by how close it is to the final game, it was probably around early to mid 1998, even though it is really close to the retail release. This VHS had stuff that nobody had ever seen before until then, like Link collecting physical music notes when he learned new songs, a shot of this beta fairy fountain before they made the Great Fairies look all freaky, and this absolutely diabolical smirking animation for Ganon.
You didn't just get a king, you got a god, bitch.
What was most interesting to me is that Link's voice is a little different here too. Not as cracked out as Mario's old voice, but just different enough to be noticeable. And a little detail that's easy to miss here is that Link was running and swinging his sword at the same time like it was no big deal. That means a few months before the release, Miyamoto sat down and was like, I think we made the game too fun. Let's fix that real quick. It's discoveries like this VHS tape that make these game prototypes such a cool mystery to follow. You never know when new information could just come out of nowhere, or in this case out of Brazil, and change up everything you thought you knew about a game's development. Ocarina of Time would come out in November of 1998 to such astronomically high levels of acclaim. And after all the shit the staff had to go through, with so many changes spanning from gigantic to minute, they probably felt like they were on top of the world. It's the kind of thing that makes me feel inspired to keep going in life. Because if you think about it, we're all in our beta builds right now. We may not have everything figured out yet, or know what our next steps in life are, but after hitting the gym and gaining some valuable new life experiences, we could also go on to have a 99 on Metacritic too. Stay tuned for more N64 prototypes.
Break free with the new Opera GX, the browser that puts you in control, with a brand new design that frees up even more pixels for personalization and an inventory of features to up your game at every level. Like GX Control to help rein in your resources with integrated limiters for RAM, CPU, and network. A sidebar for direct access to your favorite side quests.
This is the N64 game console. It may be smaller than the Super Nintendo, but believe me, this baby is packed with power.
Good luck.
After begging my parents for 2 literal years, Santa Claus finally blessed me with an N64 one Christmas morning. My parents were definitely confused about why their son kept asking for what probably seemed like an old piece of shit, but it meant the world to me. It was the first older gen console I ever got, and seeing it underneath its wrapping paper just felt so magical to me. The console came with SM64, but it was completely broken. So for the rest of my Christmas break, every morning I would run all the way down the hill to my neighbor's house to borrow their copy of Star Fox 64 from the attic. The only TV I was able to use at the time was this gigantic broken CRT in my parents' unfinished basement. So I would just sit there, bundled up in our cold basement, playing Star Fox on a gigantic buzzing TV at least twice my size, as the sunrise poured into the room from the windows.
Who are you guys? We're Star Fox.
Star Fox 64 is a game that I've only grown to appreciate more and more as the years have gone by. It wasn't enough for the devs to make an arcadey, addicting space shooter with endless replayability. They also had to inject so much charm and charisma into the game, with this really awesome cast of characters that makes Star Fox 64 transcend from just another rail shooter to an unforgettable experience. I just love all these guys so much, and could never decide on which member of the Star Fox team was my favorite as a kid. I don't even hate Slippy. Sure, I would definitely kick his ass if I ever got the opportunity, but he's still a valued member of my team who I'd lay my life down for with no question, no matter how many times he gets bitched out by Starwolf.
Fox, get this guy off me!
Throughout the series, you can even see him get sick of being everyone's punching bag, which is a really cool touch.
Try not to make a mess of things, Slippy.
Give it a rest, Falco. Seriously. Shut your feet for once.
And then there's Falco. Even though he's kind of a shithead and pisses everyone off from time to time, you can tell he's got that heart of gold and would always have your back when the going gets tough. He also has the ability to instantly attack out of his shine in midair, which is really useful. And what can you say about Peppy? He's that genuinely nice, wise old southern dad who just wants to look out for you and tell you when to use your boost thrusters on your spaceship. Shout out to Peppy. Shout out to my boys.
Star Fox 64. Test pilot boy.
You want to know about Star Fox 64, eh?
Yeah, and you'd better tell us all you know. Or else.
The devs just crammed so much strong characterization into a game where you only physically see characters on screen for like 5% of the total runtime. And that's really awesome. It also helps that everyone spouts some of the most iconic and memorable one-liners I think I have ever experienced in a game. Almost every line of dialogue is permanently burned into my brain, for better or for worse.
Can't let you do that, Star Fox. Do a barrel roll. The hatch is open. Are you gonna listen to that monkey? My Emperor! Failed you!
I'm gonna kick your ass. Then I'm gonna reenact kicking your ass.
This was the first fully voice-acted game Nintendo ever made, and while the voice clips are obviously very compressed to shit so they would fit on the cartridge, I feel like the compression adds to that analog feel that these characters are really chatting over staticky radio waves. It's all really atmospheric stuff. Sometimes when you're on the verge of death during a mission, Peppy says this particular line that always really stuck with me.
Never give up! Trust your instinct!
It was always that boost I needed to hang in there and finish a tough section of the game. But this line carries even more weight when you hear the ghost of Fox's dad say the same thing during the true ending escape sequence.
Never give up. Trust your instinct.
I'm not the first person to point this out by any means, but it's such a cool and subtle little nod to the fact that Peppy and Fox's dad used to be teammates. The phrase surviving even after his death. It's the kind of thing that sticks so close to your heart. A dude named Mitsuhiro Takano was the writer for Star Fox 64, and he said the line was added in because he sucked at the game really bad and knew just a little bit of encouragement would go a long way for players who were struggling just like him. It's a line of dialogue that's only 6 words long, but holds so much meaning to the characters, to its writer, and to the people playing it, which I really think speaks volumes to how great the writing is in this silly game about space animals shooting at each other in rocket ships.
This really is the coolest game out there.
You see? I told you. You guys, you don't know the half of it. What? There's more?
Out of all these early N64 projects, Star Fox 64 is a game that seems like it changed the least throughout its relatively short development. Sure, the UI had its fair share of changes, and Corneria used to have this mysterious winter vibe going on, but compared to a game like Ocarina of Time, a lot of the basic framework was already laid out. The staff knew exactly what they wanted to make right from the jump, and with the game's relatively short length, they were able to create something so infinitely replayable and polished. But this wasn't without some sacrifices. I'm sure a lot of you pussy-slaying game freaks already know this, but Star Fox 64 is probably as good as it is because it was able to work off of and pull from an entire Super Nintendo Star Fox sequel we never got. If you want to stretch, you could consider the 1995 canceled Star Fox 2 as somewhat of a blueprint for 64. Before the plug was pulled on the game, it had already implemented series-defining innovations like Star Wolf and all-range mode before Star Fox 64 was even a thought in Miyamoto's head. I know calling the game simply a blueprint would be doing it a disservice as its own fleshed-out experience, but I still imagine being able to refine concepts from an entire game's worth of content probably helped the team's creative process a bit. Star Fox 2 would eventually get the recognition it deserved when it was officially released on the Super NES Classic in 2017, nearly 22 years after the game was already completed. The old staff even went out for drinks to celebrate. Just look at these guys, they're living it up. The Star Fox series is full of weird stuff like this. But ignoring the 400-foot Falco in the room, the next game released after 64 was a Zelda clone where Fox runs around with a bunch of dinosaurs and collects mushrooms with his magic staff. I played the game when I was 10 years old and thought it was awesome, but I know this change in direction didn't sit right with a lot of people. There was also this part of the game where I had to pull out a spoon to beat this stupid ass button mashing minigame, which I'm still kinda salty about. So yeah, I understand it too. Mixing a rail shooter with a Zelda style adventure game is some crackhead shit. So as you can probably guess, this was never supposed to be a Star Fox game at all, but a super ambitious yet cancelled game on the N64 called Dinosaur Planet. Rare was absolutely killing it during this console generation. It's hard to believe I've gotten this far into the video without really bringing them up. Even though the N64's library is relatively small compared to its competition, it was absolutely carried by Rare's completely insane lineup of creative 3D platformers, revolutionary console shooters, fun kart racers, and action-adventure blockbusters. I'll give it to you this time, guys. You did good. Just look up any list of the best N64 games, and you're bound to see some of their projects dominating it. But they weren't done. Like we already talked about, Ocarina of Time pretty much made everyone bust in unison, and Rare was no exception. By 1999, they were ready to put out their own adventure game inspired by it, giving the console one last hurrah before the turn of the millennium. The team was determined to make this the ultimate N64 experience, pushing the system to its limits with full voice acting, dynamic lighting effects, graphics, and an extensive storyline that would have taken you on a journey across a war-torn world filled with cool dinosaurs and magic. They were gonna make that console chug so hard it would give big rigs a run for its money.
Oh, I've fallen through a bridge. Oh, and I'm just fine. That's terrific.
The game was set to star two protagonists, Saber and Crystal, who you could swap between with these big rocks called Switchstones. The two both had their own unique weapons, storylines, and companion characters. A ton of effort went into the world building of this game, with an extensive amount of design documents being available online. Some dude put in so much effort to pen all this info about his OCs, and it makes me so happy. Like, this dude's favorite food is rocks. And this wizard loves carrots and using his force field spell. And Kazuya likes collecting sneakers. You can tell everyone just had a great time putting in all this insane lore. And the fact you can still access it today is great. Nintendo let Rare use a modified Ocarina of Time engine, so progress on the game was actually coming along pretty fast. So much so that it was able to make an appearance at E3 2000, with this awesome statue showing off Saber and Crystal riding on a dinosaur. It was through E3 trailers and a couple of press kits that were able to get most of the beta footage we have for this game. We can see just how ambitious it was, with a large variety of areas, cool cinematic cutscenes, and vehicle sections. Everyone who saw this game was naturally really impressed. And as the legend goes, a cheeky man lurking in the shadows had a particular interest in the game. Miyamoto really liked Dinosaur Planet, but offered one suggestion that I'm sure many of you already see coming. Thinking that the console wasn't big enough for two anthropomorphic fox main characters, he, let's just say, heavily encouraged the team to make it a Star Fox game instead. As you can probably imagine, not everyone in the staff was super into this idea, as they already set the game in its own unique universe with its own rules. But now they gotta shove Star Fox into it and make Andros the final boss for no reason.
I'd be looking forward to this day.
On top of all this, the N64 was on its way out, so they had to not only switch a ton of the established lore, but port everything they made to the GameCube. But thanks to this old, nasty Crystal fan site, we actually got some anonymous interviews from the team that shed some light on how they were feeling about all this at the time. We ported Dinosaur Planet from the N64, cut about 1/3 of the levels, and then changed the main character to make Star Fox Adventures. The biggest difference was that Crystal was intended to be as prominent as the male character Saber. The game was divided equally between them. Half the game was Crystal, half the game Saber. But when it came to Star Fox, all Crystal's levels were either switched to Fox or cut. If this website was a person, I bet they'd smell terrible.
Oh my god.
Even though Star Fox Adventures and the original build of Dinosaur Planet are pretty similar, Crystal's extremely limited role in the final game is where you can see corporate meddling shine through the worst. You can play as her for the first 30 minutes, and then after that, Fox just creeps on her for the rest of the game. Originally, Nintendo was going to make Rare remove her entirely before they realized that she could bring in a whole new audience to the game. That being people who like touching their penis. The change from Dinosaur Planet to Star Fox Adventures put off so many people at the end of the day though. So I wonder if Nintendo's idea of attaching the project to an established franchise really helped its legacy in the long run. I guarantee you if Star Fox Adventures came out without any Star Fox elements in it, people would probably regard it as a fun, technically impressive Rareware title that could have spawned its own series. JonTron wouldn't have shit his pants over it. He might not have even have said those things about the gene pool. A lot of people speculate over Miyamoto's suggestion, hypothesizing that it might have been a galaxy-brained 4D chess ploy to keep Rare as a third-party company just a little bit longer. By attaching Star Fox to Dinosaur Planet, Nintendo could make sure the game wouldn't be stolen by any other companies trying to buy Rare out, as Activision and Microsoft were currently beginning to start a bidding war to steal them away from the big N. Ultimately, we know Microsoft won out in the end, and Rare would leave Nintendo literally the day after Star Fox Adventures dropped. They would then ride off into the sunset to make Endless Connect slop for Bill Gates' eternal amusement. But let's take today to remember the good times. Like, remember Conker's Bad Fur Day?
It was a good game!
I ordered this repro cartridge of it off of AliExpress a few years back, and like to lie to people and say it's real. While to some, the concept of a kiddie platformer parody with swearing, beer, and tits sounds a little Reddit, all things considered. I think the game kind of owns. This adult comedy-focused direction was actually a sharp pivot from the traditional, kid-friendly mascot collectathon the game was going to be, as the market was already oversaturated with them at the time. Revealed at E3 1997, Conker's Quest was director Chris Seaver's spin on a Mario 64 style 3D platformer, starring Conker from Diddy Kong Racing and his girlfriend or whatever, running around collecting acorns in a happy little world that didn't have any beer or tits yet.
At the E3 trade show in the United States this year, Nintendo was showing that Mario wasn't their only star attraction because a squirrel called Conker was impressing the crowds.
The game even had this really ahead of its time feature where the playable characters would visibly react to their environments, just like Link would go on to do in the Wind Waker, and just like people do in real life. But seeing as how it had to share the spotlight with Rare's other upcoming title, Banjo-Kazooie, the comparatively less finished Conker's Quest sort of slipped under a lot of people's radar. Over the years, it would change its name to 12 Tales Conker 64, and struggle through several more unsuccessful builds, until most people assumed our pal Conker was quietly taken out back behind closed doors. Like they shot him, I mean. But they would all be proven wrong in January of 2000, where they revealed that the Conker project was going to be making a comeback in a way you wouldn't have expected.
You are my friend!
Most people assumed this was some kind of late April Fool's Day prank, but they looked pretty stupid when the game actually came out in 2001, alongside a really awesome condom-based advertising campaign.
I was paying for it now.
This 1080 shift from a mascot platformer to a raunchy parody of one shows just how far Rare was willing to go to keep their output fresh and exciting. To see this level of subversiveness for a genre that was still so relatively new, and from a company that had such a big hand in refining it, is absolutely crazy. Again, a lot of people may think just slapping tits and swearing into a seemingly kid-friendly world is a pretty overdone concept, but this was before Newgrounds was at its peak, and the idea was totally driven into the ground by a bunch of 14-year-olds with Adobe Flash.
And it's funny because it's the juxtaposition of like the cute, lovable Mario characters, but it's like all gritty and real and dark.
It's still important to note that Conker's Bad Fur Day probably would have just stayed as a run-of-the-mill kiddie platformer if Banjo-Kazooie didn't already come out 2 years before and be such a tough act to follow, because this game kicks ass. Star Fox may have been the first game I played on my N64, but Banjo-Kazooie was the first one I actually owned. After seeing how revered it was online, I was luckily able to order a copy of it from DK Oldies for a really good, completely reasonable price. Hey, come on man, is that sarcasm? Do you really not want me to throw in a free copy of the Smurfs for the Wii? I would go on to play that thing every day after school with a sandwich and a glass of apple juice, like a total king. I always loved how packed each of the game's worlds were, just filled to the brim with fun things to do, NPCs to talk to, things to collect, and minigames that make me want to put a gun in my mouth. While comparing Banjo to its direct inspiration doesn't do the game's movement tech any favors, that would be doing a massive disservice to the experience that Banjo-Kazooie is and what it's trying to be. Sure, Mario 64's movement offers the player more expression and flexibility. Banjo leverages its somewhat limited toolset to create a more directed playthrough that carves its own space in the 3D platforming genre. So that's why it was always kind of shocking to me that BK was never even going to be a platformer to begin with, or even star Banjo as the main character at all. It's mostly common knowledge now that the game actually started out life as a late Super Nintendo release under the title Project Dream. It was put together by the staff who just finished up work on DKC 2, and fresh off of creating mind-bending levels of Peak, they're ready to adapt Rare's cutting-edge pre-renders to an RPG-style adventure game. But as opposed to playing as a cartoon bear with yellow shorts, you were gonna play as this kid named Edson who fought pirates with his fugly-looking dog sidekick. From the footage we've gotten of the prototype over the years, it's safe to say that if Project Dream came out on the SNES, it probably would have been the most visually stunning game on the whole console. It actually looks so good that it makes the later build they had to make on the N64 look like absolute dog shit by comparison. This early N64 era of the project is where Dream started to turn into something completely unrecognizable from how it started. They switched out Edson for a more marketable bear-type character, and changed the whole genre of the game from an RPG to an isometric platformer where you collected fruit. They even thought about making the bear a skateboarder for some reason.
One of our initial ideas was to kind of almost give Banjo this kind of almost like skater-esque look. He had a baseball cap and these kind of giant oversized skate shoes.
But the story goes that after seeing a prototype of Mario 64, they trashed everything they had and started fresh the next day with an all-new, more focused direction for the project. All in all, Banjo-Kazooie was the result of 4 separate builds that changed the initial pitch little by little until we got what we have now. A game that was integral to so many people's memories, and one that's still a joy to complete to this day. All these different development stories from Rare really go to show how much uncertainty and experimentation was going on during this generation. One day your project could be going steady, the next you'd be scrambling to restart everything from the ground up and you're eating ice soup all week. New genres were being created, refined, and scrapped all in the span of a few years as the industry was being flipped on its head. I can't believe any of these games came out and are as solid as they are. Because as we've seen, some projects weren't so lucky, stuck in a development hell that spanned across the N64's entire lifespan. This reality is one that our final prototype found itself in. It's also what I'd consider to be the holy grail of canceled video games. But to understand the beginnings of this project, we're gonna have to go to the release of a little film called Toy Story.
Walt Disney Pictures presents the first ever computer animated feature film.
Code Red, we are Code Red.
To infinity and beyond. Toy Story, rated G.
Toy Story was a crazy-ass movie. Its release in 1995 fundamentally changed the medium of animated films forever, by showing that computer graphics weren't just some stupid shit for nerds to get excited about, that their full potential could lay beyond the realm of simple special effects, and could actually be used to tell stories in ways never seen before. John Lasseter was on the top of the food chain. When I founded Pixar with my good friend Jeffrey Epstein, we never would have expected Toy Story to be such a massive success. Folks from all around the world found themselves entranced by the instantly memorable characters and the groundbreaking adventure they went on. But there was one man in particular who found himself very impressed. One man that we elite game players know very well. Shigesato Itoi. Itoi, who you may recall from earlier as the guy who helped name the N64, was known for being somewhat of a renaissance man in Japan. From voicing the dad in My Neighbor Totoro, to his wildly successful publishing career, to directing his recently released hit Super Famicom game, Mother 2, also known as Earthbound in the West. While it would take a while to achieve the worldwide appeal it has now, Mother 2 was a game that flipped so many JRPG conventions on their head, bringing this level of sentimentality and creativity that only Itoi could provide. Even though making the game was a total pain in the ass, and was almost cancelled like 3 times, that didn't stop Itoi from getting a little ahead of himself. He was so eager to get started on the next game in the series, that while Mother 2 was still being worked on, Itoi would call up one of his game designers late at night about all the ideas he had for its follow-up, to which his designer probably told him to go to sleep. This was the same man who sat in front of that Toy Story premiere absolutely entranced. Seeing this movie had lit a fire in him, and just as Toy Story set the standard for storytelling in 3D movies, Itoi was determined to do the same but for 3D video games with his new project, Mother 3. Taking influence from the Hungarian novel The Notebook, as well as some extremely subtle character design inspiration from Toy Story, he would team up with artist Benimaru Ito and start mapping out the world and story of this new game. A story that would break the conventions of its own series, and in his own words, betray the player. The history of Mother 3 is incredibly dense, so I'm gonna try to breeze through it year by year. After being in sneaky development for a while, July of 1996 would roll around and Mother fans would rejoice when they opened up that month's issue of Dengeki Nintendo 64, a Nintendo magazine that was focused on keeping everyone in the loop about the latest N64 releases. With the console launching in Japan just about a month ago, Itoi would pop in to let everyone know that Mother 3 was in the works, and it was gonna blow everyone away. There were gonna be multiple pro tags, fan favorite Al-Qaeda member Porky was gonna come back, and the contemporary setting that the Mother series was known for might be switching up in a big way. And luckily, it wouldn't be long before fans got their first glimpse at this new project, as Shoshinkai would hold its 1996 event around November and show off Mother 3's first teaser trailer, announcing it as a major release for the disc drive, which didn't seem like a dogshit idea yet. For a relatively young project, the world just looks so lively, filled with so many NPCs and all these little moving parts. Even though there wasn't enough shown off yet to make any real judgments, Mother 3 already looked really dynamic, and was set to be a completely fresh experience from its predecessor, with an all-new setting and art style. Benimaru Ito's influence could already be seen with the various different character models and screenshots they released at the event. Everyone just looked goofy as hell, a huge departure from the Mother series' old Peanuts-inspired character designs. It seemed like progress was coming along just fine, but behind the scenes, no one knew what the hell they were doing or how to even make a 3D game in the first place, but they marched on anyway. 1997 would be notable for marking a huge stylistic change for Mother 3. While most of the NPCs would remain untouched, Main characters like Lucas over here would be receiving a bit of a makeover at the request of Itoi himself. Apparently, he thought this version of Lucas looked a little bit too similar to Benimaru Ito, and told him he had to switch things up so you weren't playing as some bizarre 12-year-old Benimaru self-insert. This redesign he's talking about was actually just 90s Leonardo DiCaprio with a fanny pack, and that's not a joke. As development moved forward, some characters would borrow the likeness of real-life celebrities, like Clint Eastwood and even the late great Jonathan Banks. You can tell they were having so much fun with this new texture mapping technology. They even put some random kid's face in the game after he won a contest. The guy even has his own page on the Earthbound wiki. I wonder if this dude grew up and told all of his Tinder dates about it. We have access to so many fun development tidbits just like this thanks to the Mother 3 Times segment of Dengeki Nintendo 64, which ran from 1997 to 1999. The extremely dedicated and completely batshit insane Mother community has already preserved and translated every segment of Mother 3 Times on the Mother Forever website, which I'll link below. These pages offer so much insight into the kind of experience Mother 3 was, with all these gameplay screenshots, behind the scenes photos, fan art, and even these cute in-universe advertisements. It painted the picture of a world extremely different from Mother 2. Instead of digging out of a trash can in Cincinnati, the game was going to take place in a primitive town called Tazmily, focusing on an ensemble cast of villagers fighting against the tyranny of the Pig Mask Army. Over the next few years, the Mother 3 Times would carry most, if not all, the pre-release hype, as significant updates on the game would be incredibly sparse throughout the rest of 1997 and 1998. Sure, we got a little bit more footage of it in late 97, and the not so surprising news that the project would be moving off of the disk drive, but no concrete release date in sight or even any playable demos. But this would all change at Shoshinkai 1999, where everyone finally got to see what Itoi and his team were cooking. Now under the title Mother 3 Fall of the Pig King, attendees not only got to see a huge new trailer showing off the game's technically impressive and surprisingly cinematic cutscenes, but also a 10-minute playable demo that allowed viewers to explore Tazmily Village and mess around with the new rhythm-based combat system. This was probably the biggest press release Mother 3 ever got, and needless to say, the game looked incredible. Lines for the demo lasted upwards of 50 minutes, and everyone was walking away really impressed. The game had finally also gotten what seemed like a rock-solid release date of May 2000. Even though the project was years behind schedule, the future seemed brighter than ever. But unfortunately, I think we all know how this story ends. Mother 3 would once again fail to meet its deadline, pushing the project even further behind schedule. So far that it wouldn't have even been out by the GameCube's launch. So in August of 2000, Itoi solemnly made this statement on his website, directed to the fans who waited all these years. To be honest, the reality of what's happening still hasn't hit me yet, but I will express a little bit of what I'm feeling here. Last night, I quickly sped my way through the parts of the game that were done so I could get screenshots to put up on the site. Mr. Miura from the Mother Team's art department took up the controller, and 3 hours passed as we played through battles in the game and discussed various things. The reality is that despite 6 years being in development, Mother 3 has been cancelled. In regard to the parts of the game that have been completed, I can say with complete confidence that it's a very fun and interesting game. I'm also still very proud of the story with its constant plot twists, but in realistic terms, it is now a phantom game that only the development staff knows. At the end of the day, it was the disproportionate ratio of ambition to actual hands-on experience that killed Mother 3. The game was set to be a 12-chapter epic, filled with high-effort cutscenes, multiple playable characters, and an extremely emotional narrative that would have revolutionized the realm of video game storytelling forever. To developers who knew their way around 3D, it would have been a major undertaking. But to developers who had never even created a 3D game before, it was impossible. If I was Itoi, I probably would have jumped off a bridge. But luckily for us, he's a much stronger man than me, and never let go of his dream.
Game Boy Advance Mother 3.
Mother 3 was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2006 to massive critical acclaim, but only in Japan. After a development cycle lasting a whole 12 years, Itoi's story was finally told, and what a damn story it is. I'm not ashamed to admit it, the ending actually made me cry really manly tears, just like he said it would. Even though it was on a totally different console and all those years later, I'm sure finally getting the story of Mother 3 out to the public must have felt incredible for all the people who dedicated so much of their time and energy to it. Comparing the small amount of footage and screenshots we have of the N64 version to the GBA release shows just how consistent the game's core stayed since its inception. This supposedly extremely unfinished build has scenes spanning from the beginning all the way to the game's climax. It makes you wonder just how far along the prototype actually was. You know, I love the Mother 3 we got, but I think I speak for a lot of people when I say I wish I got to try out what never was. I want to see all my favorite scenes and characters the way they were originally intended. Mother 3 GBA has some gorgeous sprites and an art style that's more consistent with the other games in the series, but I still want to see cool Fanny Pack Lucas and Mike Ehrmantraut Wes. I want to know what's happening in this really cool screenshot and dissect all the little story differences that I can. I want to see how a toy originally planned to set the standard for storytelling in 3D games all those years ago. So I'm always going to hope that somebody breaks into HAL Laboratory with a crowbar and steal us a prototype cartridge. And while that may sound insane, similar situations can and have happened before. As some of you may have guessed, I may not have been entirely truthful throughout this whole video. I've been leaving out vital pieces of the puzzle, until now. When we come back, we're going to be jumping to the modern day and talk about the legendary 2020 Giga Leak.
Nintendo 64.
Systems fully loaded. Accessing network. Welcome to a fish's paradise.
This is Zamus Clark. Nintendo hates this man. They hate him even more than people who upload their soundtracks on YouTube. But why? From the outside, he seems like just another law-abiding, British, 24-year-old security researcher. You can mistake him for any normal guy. But on the internet, he has a few devious hobbies. And I don't mean grooming minors on Discord either. Going by the moniker Slipstream, Clark was one of the most notorious hackers in recent memory, with just a few of his unfortunate victims being Microsoft, VTech, the country of North Korea, and in the case of 2018, Nintendo. One fateful day that March, Clark did what he does best and broke into Nintendo's internal network, stealing a whopping 2 terabytes of data, consisting of design documents, game source code, and mountains of confidential project files, spanning all the way from the late 80s to the 2010s. Some of Clark's findings slowly started to leak out to the public through 4chan's VP board, where Anons would be shocked to find previously unavailable Pokemon Gold and Silver demo ROMs. But it didn't end there. A steady flow of Pokemon source codes and beta sprites would flood the board in the coming months, until finally Clark had gone too far. In late 2018, the Nintendo ninjas had finally caught up with him. Clark had mysteriously vanished from the internet, and as reports of his apparent arrest began to roll in during early 2019, let's just say he wasn't going to be leaking any more Pokemon ROMs anytime soon. He would plead guilty to data breach charges from both Nintendo and Microsoft, but was able to evade incarceration due to his autism. He sure is lucky. My autism never let me evade jail time. It just made me really like Sonic the Hedgehog. You'd think this would be the end of the data leaks, but it wasn't. In fact, they were just getting started. The Nintendo ninjas were just a little too late. Before his arrest, Clark had already sent the data to his goons, who would continue to slowly release Pokemon-related leaks from 2019 into early 2020. And this all led up to July 24th, where the floodgates were open. 3 gigabytes worth of Nintendo's internal files were leaked onto 4chan, but this time, it encompassed way more than just Pokemon, including never-before-seen beta content from all kinds of Super Nintendo and N64 games. We got the evolution of Yoshi's sprite in Super Mario World. Not only that, but we got a playable prototype of Yoshi's Island called Super Donkey, where you run around as this disgusting, armless Rayman type creature. There were all these high quality assets, beta sprites, and renders for so many different games. These high-res Ocarina of Time icons in particular are almost scary to look at. And then there were just some straight up shockers in there, like Beavis's 3D face in the files of F-Zero X. Some more of these assets include a bunch of cut character portraits from Star Fox 2, which had a few human pilots we've never seen. And anyone who thought this might be some kind of elaborate hoax, the co-creator of Star Fox 2, Dylan Cuthbert, was actually able to corroborate its authenticity. All the leaks were likely 100% real documents that we were never meant to see, or in some cases, hear.
Never give up. Trust your instincts.
Can't let you do that, Star Fox. All range mode. I'll take this one. Get the one behind me. Be careful, it's a trap.
One of the biggest finds was the once thought lost, uncompressed voice lines from Star Fox 64. All the classic quotes were here and accounted for, in a clarity nobody ever thought they would ever hear.
Do a barrel roll. The hatches are open. Are you gonna listen to that monkey? My Emperor! I failed you!
Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash. It turns out that I got both of the same one.
Hearing all my favorite characters that I've been listening to for practically my whole life in such crystal clear quality almost feels wrong. But here they are, preserved after 23 years in their full glory. They sound so good it's like they could have been recorded yesterday. You can hear all these little inflections that the original game's compression hid, and that just blows my mind.
You're becoming more like your father.
And that wasn't the only set of voice lines the data miners were able to dig up. Hidden within the GigaLeak were the devs' placeholder lines that, to my knowledge, nobody even knew existed. All these programming geeks just gathered around the microphone and gave it their all. And it sounds like they are having a blast making history together. Star Fox 64's lines are an iconic piece of video game culture that will probably still be quoted and requoted long after we're all dead and civilization has collapsed. So the fact that we not only got both the raw audio files of the final game and its placeholder dub is nothing less than a triumph for video game preservation. Equally as interesting are these beta maps discovered for Ocarina of Time and Mario 64. Both were games that went through extreme periods of change and experimentation. Their development cycles bursting with cut content we used to only be able to see in fractions of and blurry trailers from nearly 30 years ago. Our underappreciated friend can rejoice today, as we can not only see, but fully appreciate the worlds he built that were once lost. We have a build of Ganon's castle from the earliest stage of Zelda 64's development, back when the whole game was supposed to take place there. We got some test areas for Mario, most of them just testing out his traction and momentum. There's this particular leaked area that fans have dubbed the Fun House. It's unclear if this is just a test room or if it was part of the original game's castle, but something about it kind of freaks me out. That sort of slapped together feel that the finished Mario 64 had is in full swing here, with the whole area being a maze with walls covered in so many nonsensical repetitive textures. If I woke up here, I'd probably just kill myself. But staying on the topic of Mario 64, the GigaLeak gave us one of the biggest finds that humanity has ever had since the discovery of fire. And if you've been keeping up with video game preservation in the last few years, I'm sure you already know what I'm talking about. Hidden deep within the files of the 2020 GigaLeak was a little 3D model that sort of made everyone soy out of their minds. L was finally real.
That's the thing. Yes.
I don't think I can stress to you just how insane of a day it was for people like me when we saw this model for the first time. All those Romanian children who made tutorials on how to unlock Luigi were actually onto something after all. Sure, he was never in the files of the retail release, but for someone who spent so much time trying to unlock him like a lot of people, seeing what he was going to look like in the earlier stages of development was absolutely mind-blowing. And the fact that this discovery was made exactly 24 years and 1 month after Mario 64 came out is an almost terrifying coincidence that makes me feel like I'm living in a simulation. L is real? More like God is real. So yeah, the Giga Leak was kinda crazy. I'm probably gonna tell my grandkids about it, and they're just gonna have to listen whether they like it or not. I'm not trying to condone data theft or anything, but this was a situation where us law-abiding citizens were able to watch from the sidelines, and just appreciate all these amazing discoveries that we thought we would never see. What's really crazy is that the Giga Leak only consisted of 3 gigabytes, out of the 2 terabytes of internal files that Clark apparently stole. That's actually less than 1%. We still don't know the full scope of Clark's thievery, and now that all of his internet access is heavily monitored by the government, we'll probably never know. But that's okay, because the Giga Leak wasn't even the only insane development to come out of the last few years. In February 2021, a December 2000 build of Dinosaur Planet was leaked by the preservation group Forest of Illusion. The story goes that they purchased this scary-ass CD from a private collector, and they're able to rip the ROM and put it on archive.org for everyone to try out. Being an unfinished game, it isn't optimized too great and has some bugs that render it unplayable after a certain point, but you can actually get surprisingly far into the story and can even switch to Saber, whose model and dialogue had already been changed to Fox at this point. Before this leak, everyone thought that the Star Fox rebrand only happened after development switched over to the GameCube. But nah, here's our boy in his polygonal glory.
I am Fox McCloud, Royal Knight of the Lilat system. I've come to take the prince back to his home. Hey, wait!
Even though I couldn't really get all that far before the game softlocked me, I was able to see enough to realize that Rare was actually living up to all their promises, and was making something that would have been so special to so many people. Some dorks on Reddit were still like crying about it though. It's an unplayable mess that's just being overly hyped because Star Fox Adventures ruined it, when in essence it's the same shit. You'd be fine playing SFA. Same gameplay and areas in the end. That's just like your opinion, man. You can barely play as Crystal in SFA. Sure, Crystal barely has any screen time in SFA, that's correct, but gameplay-wise, DP is an unfinished fucking mess. And I'm not talking about sex. Well, I'm enjoying it so far. What the heck does any of this have to do with sex? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Fans have gone a long way in reconstructing the game's data to make it a little more playable, similar to what RE fans did with 1.5. So maybe give it a few years and I might check it out again to see what else was hidden in that ROM for us to find. Rare fans in general have been eating pretty good for the past few years. They haven't got any games or anything, of course, but for some reason, the creator of Banjo-Kazooie, Tim Stamper, woke up one day and just decided to release all these tweets about Project Dream 64 and Conker's Quest for literally no reason. I'm pretty sure he just wanted to tickle our balls a little bit, but it was still really cool seeing footage that was previously confidential.
So it's true then. The Nintendo 64 treasure does exist after all.
All this stuff doesn't include the little victories we had over the 2010s. Like how we actually found the unreleased Super Mario 64 DD at a Japanese thrift store, and even an American N64 disk drive prototype thanks to Metal Jesus Rocks. That's something we never thought was even in the cards for Nintendo after how bad the DD did in Japan. Shout out to Metal Jesus Rocks, man. I wish I could drink a brewski and talk about PS1 games with him and Radical Reggie in the man cave, but that'll probably never happen. It feels like new developments are coming out every day, so much so that I'm sure this video is going to become dated within just a few years, or even months. After situations like the Giga Leak, we gotta admit that we don't know what's around the corner, and that's really exciting. As I was editing, there was a massive Game Freak data leak that nobody could stop talking about. But what's arguably better than all these leaks and developments are the sea of creative fan projects they've spawned as a result. One of my favorite recent examples are these insanely impressive Mother 3 fan animations by the YouTuber Snowwood that give us a peek into that alternate world where the game came out on schedule and was the 3D cinematic blockbuster it was always meant to be. It takes iconic scenes from the Mother 3 we got and reinterprets them to fit EB64's art style and battle system. You could show this to me and say it was a legit leak and I'd believe you. They're made with so much love and have so many little artistic flourishes that make it almost hard to believe they're not actually real. The same can be said for the Earthbound 64 Experience project, made by a passionate group of fans here on YouTube. Impatient for someone to do that crowbar thing I was talking about earlier, they're just going ahead and making their own playable N64 version of Mother 3, recreating countless textures, models, environments, and cutscenes to make some kind of approximation of what existing in that version of the game must have felt like. The project's come a long way since I started following it, so I'm just sitting here waiting with my thumb up my ass for them to release another demo.
Hello.
it is me, Salsa, and welcome to the Earthbound 64 Recreation Exploration Demo.
Hey, you're not Salsa. You're Monkey Ness. I've seen your videos. According to him, somebody even showed Shigesato Itoi this project, to which he said it looks a lot more finished than the original, making me think that the N64 version was a little less complete than I initially thought. While these guys are having to make everything completely from scratch, other fan projects like this Ocarina of Time Space World 97 demo were able to directly pull assets from the Giga League to create an experience pretty similar to what people might have had at the event all those years ago. It gives us a vertical slice of what Ocarina of Time was like around 1 year before its release, allowing us to explore Hyrule Field with its wild horses, battle in some prototype dungeons, and check out all these other little areas we've never been able to see before the Giga League. Let me tell ya, after staring at all those Zelda 64 trailers and seeing all those unused maps while making this video, getting to walk around in them is almost unreal. Seeing beta footage is one thing, but actually getting to play it is something else entirely. I really had to get to grips with Link's slightly more complicated sword fighting mechanics. Like, instead of the jump attack being mapped to one button, it's the jump command used in tandem with the sword button, which definitely threw off years of muscle memory, not gonna lie. Even though it's a decent bit more involved because of this, the combat in general feels a lot more stiff and way less kinetic compared to what we'd get in the final game. At least I'm finally able to run and swing my sword at the same time. I'm still kind of unsure as to why they cut this in the first place, because it makes me feel like the man. There's no way for me to say exactly how accurate this ROM is to the actual Shoshinkai demo, but it was still incredible to explore Beta Hyrule Field on horseback and talk to all these cute NPCs with their older speech bubble dialogue boxes. Similarly cool is this earlier version of the Deku Tree. This version is way more sprawling and less focused, built around this tall central structure, kinda like how the worlds in Mario 64 were designed a few years prior. Speaking of Mario 64, it had a fan-made prototype build of its own too, also scraped together with bits from the Giga League and approximations. I can finally run around to that night-themed lobby and listen to Bizarro Mario yip and yap all over the place. If I thought it was hard to adjust to the Zelda demo, I hadn't seen anything yet. The story goes that Shiggy spent like a whole year trying to get Mario's controls just right, and after playing this, I'd believe it. If anything, playing this clunky, bitch-ass, no long jump version of Mario makes me appreciate SM64's movement so much more than I already did. What's even cooler about this recreation is that it looks like the fans threw in a ton of new worlds and secrets to find. Like, check this part out. Wait, I think I downloaded the wrong ROM. I should probably explain what this actually is.
Nintendo 64.
Nintendo's new game machine is 64 bits, making it the most powerful machine on the market.
Dear Mario, please come to the castle.
B3313 is a ROM hack that formed in the wake of the 2020 Nintendo Giga League, claiming to be an alleged pre-release build of Mario 64 that they have hidden from us. Created by musician Chris R. Lilo and a sizable team of devs, it combines leaked beta maps with wholly original fan creations to construct a version of SM64 where every rumor, every theory, and every conspiracy formed over the years were actually true. There's no better way to explain what B3313 is rather than just showing you what a first-time experience playing it is like.
I'm so excited to play this. Mario 64.
Let's look around the castle first, actually.
You actually, oh my god.
He's moving around in all three directions.
You can go sideways?
After booting up a save file, we're dropped in the courtyard and told to pay a visit to the castle ahead. After reconfiguring the controls on my emulate video game console, I have a little look around the area to see things aren't quite as I remember. For one, we got that ominous black hole clock symbol on the castle and an entire courtyard area behind it. These double doors won't open for me yet, so I just head around to the front and into the lobby, in all of its blue beta version glory. I jump into a painting and go through this prototype version of Womp's Fortress, where I'm able to grab my first star on top of the tower. Going through these main doors up top, I'm actually able to fight Bowser too, and get one of these mysterious red stars that I'm sure will come in handy. But afterwards, I'm booted out to a room I've never seen before. not from the original game or in any pre-release trailers. It's a grand hall with almost too many doors to count, each door leading to more doors, and then leading to even more doors. I was starting to get a little lost, but hey, it's okay. I'm sure there's a map somewhere online. Maybe I can check. Never mind. It was here where it dawned on me just how monstrously huge the castle was. The original game's castle was always a little abstract with its size, but the one here was a labyrinth of rooms, doors, secrets, and even more doors. Every time you think it can't get any bigger, you're proven wrong, as you end up in a new place even stranger than the last, pushing deeper and deeper into a winding, Italian plumber-themed abyss.
Wait a second, this is Bowser's room.
I think I heard about this from some little Irish boy I went to school with.
Equally as vast were the large expanse of different worlds I found, with each having their own set of stars to collect. It seemed like almost every painting I entered sent me somewhere new, some worlds being slightly altered versions of vanilla ones, others being completely original to this game, some even resembling testing rooms that lack any rhyme or reason. How many stages could there possibly be?
The size of the game may be up to 150 stages.
Maybe he was just trying to warn us. I keep noticing some of these places seem so familiar, like here, and here, in this place too. Wait, this is a recreation of an old Mario attraction at a Mexican theme park. There's the coins and the bomb and everything. It's as if the game was born from the Mario 64 from our collective unconscious, thrown together by an AI that wants to actively mess with us. The structure of rooms change, traps litter the halls, and the ghost of Peach appears time and time again, taunting you to keep looking for her. I'm really good at video games, so that allowed me to find some areas that the AI definitely didn't want me seeing, crashing my game on multiple occasions. Eventually, all my exploring led to a dark hallway, with a single Mario standing alone in the distance, facing away from me. Even though my brain was telling me to get the hell out of there, I kept walking towards him anyway. Oh shit! Oh jeez! Stay away! Get out!
Dude, Princess Toadstool, I'm not gonna lie, I would Princess Toadstool.
At this point, I was getting pretty tired, and it was way past my wife's boyfriend's mandated bedtime curfew, so I thought I would just call it a day. And that's probably for the best. B3313 is one of those experiences best had as blind as possible, and I don't want to ruin any more of its surprises any more than I already have. But it feels like it only makes sense to finish off with a fan project that takes the inherent mystery and uncanniness of the N64, weaponizing it to give you a type of horror that only it can provide. I'll drop a link to it below if any of y'all want to give it a try if you haven't yet. But remember, play the game, don't let it play you. We've come a long way on our journey into this strange little console. From Project Reality to data breaches, from Kirby 64 to Mother 3, all the way to whatever the hell this is. A lot has been said and will be said about how the N64 is ugly, how its controller is a strange bad dragon anal probing device, and how all of its games haven't aged well. But I don't know. I kinda don't give a shit about any of that. Sure, graphically most of its games don't objectively hold up as well compared to some of the best looking Super Nintendo games. But what the N64 does have is this excitement factor. It's like a dog so excited to go on a walk that it pees all over the floor. And believe me, it did pee on the floor a couple of times. But so many of the actual games it had were genre-defining trailblazers that got so many things right on their first try. The N64 isn't my favorite console by any means, but it's still one that's so important to my development as a human being, which is kind of sad now that I say it out loud. Seeing it at my friend's house and not knowing anything about it sparked this fire in me to learn all about video games and consume as much content about them as I could. I wouldn't be half the neckbeard I am today without it, and I'm clearly not alone. ROM hacking and native PC ports have come a long way in the past few years. So the future of N64 preservation seems brighter than it ever has been. The stuff I've seen with Render 96 and Ship of Arcadian have been absolutely mind-blowing. And the fact that someone had recently developed a source code converter that can port virtually any N64 game to PC shows me just how much people still care about this mysterious gray box. But hopefully after that feature-length video, it's a little less mysterious.